I came home on Christmas Day. Snow hissed against the windshield as I pulled into the driveway of the Colonial in Greenwich, Connecticut, the one Margaret and I had bought with my first big bonus from the firm. The porch light was off. No wreath. No glow from the 12-foot Fraser fir we always erected in the bay window. Just the cold metallic smell of winter and a silence that felt deliberate. Inside, the alarm chirped once, then fell quiet. I called out. My voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling and died. The kitchen island was bare except for a single envelope propped against a bottle of Macallan 18. My name, typed. No warmth. We went on a family cruise. Take care of Dad for us. Back in 10 days. Love, Margaret. 10 days. The words tasted like rust. My daughter Emily had texted me 2 days ago from the airport. Can't wait to see you, Dad. Big surprise planned. No mention of a cruise. No mention of leaving me with Harold, her husband, Richard's father, whom I'd met exactly twice in 8 years. I found him in the study, parked beneath the portrait of my late father-in-law, the one who'd founded the firm I now ran. Harold's wheelchair faced the dormant fireplace. A tartan blanket covered his knees. His head lolled, but when my shadow crossed the rug, one eye snapped open, milky, sharp, alive. "Jonathan," he rasped. The voice was sandpaper over gravel. "Shut the door." I obeyed. The click of the latch sounded final. Harold's lips barely moved. "Shall we begin our revenge?" My pulse stuttered. I'd expected drool, maybe a vacant stare. Instead, the old man's gaze pinned me like a butterfly to cork. I nodded once, slowly. He smiled. It was not a kind expression. Over the next hour, Harold spoke in fragments, each sentence a landmine. Richard, his own son, had been siphoning funds from the family trust for years. Not petty cash, millions. Offshore accounts in the Caymans, shell companies registered to Margaret's maiden name. Emily knew. She'd signed the transfers. The cruise wasn't a vacation. It was a celebration. They liquidated the last of the liquid assets that morning, wired everything to a numbered account in Singapore, and boarded a private charter out of Miami under assumed names. Harold had the proof. A thumb drive hidden in the hollowed leg of his wheelchair. Bank statements, forged signatures, emails between Richard and a Panamanian lawyer. My daughter's looping cursive on a power of attorney form that stripped me of everything but the house, and even that was leveraged to the hilt. "Why tell me?" I asked. My voice cracked like thin ice. Harold's eye glinted. "Because they left me here to rot. Because I'm already dead to them. And because you, Jonathan, still have a pulse they underestimated." I poured 2 fingers of the Macallan. My hand didn't shake. Not yet. Harold outlined the first move. We'd start with the house. The mortgage was held by a subsidiary of my own firm, Richard's doing. A quiet coup 6 months ago. Harold had the original promissory note never recorded. A clerical oversight, he called it. We'd file it tomorrow, trigger a default, force a foreclosure auction before they could refinance. They'd return to a sold sign in the yard and a sheriff's notice on the door, but that was just the opening salvo. Harold's plan was surgical. He'd spent decades as the firm's silent enforcer before the stroke, before the wheelchair. He knew where everybody was buried because he dug half the graves. Richard thought his father's mind had liquefied with his legs. A fatal miscalculation. I asked the only question that mattered. "What do you want?" Harold's answer was soft. "I want my son to feel what it's like to beg." Outside, snow began to fall in earnest, erasing tire tracks, footprints, the last evidence of a family that had vanished. Inside, the fire caught, throwing long shadows across leather-bound law books and the portrait of a man who'd once trusted blood over everything. Harold closed his eye. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we open accounts they don't know exist." I left him in the dark. In the hallway, I passed the framed photo from Emily's wedding, her smile radiant, Richard's arm possessive around her waist. I paused, touched the glass. My reflection stared back, gaunt, gray at the temples, eyes already hardening into something unrecognizable. In the master bedroom, Margaret's side of the closet was empty. Not a single hanger. The absence was louder than any scream. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the thumb drive on my laptop. The files loaded one by one. Each document was a betrayal in 12-point font. I read until the numbers blurred, until the Macallan was gone, until the house settled around me like a coffin. At 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Merry Christmas, Dad. Wish you were here." A photo attached Emily on the bow of a yacht. Champagne flute raised, Richard's lips at her ear. Behind them, the ocean was black glass. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then I typed a single reply. Enjoy the sun. Winter's coming. I hit send, powered off the phone, and went downstairs. Harold was awake, waiting. The fire had burned down to embers, but the room felt hotter than before. Phase 1, he said. I nodded. The house was empty, but it was no longer silent. Somewhere in the walls, the gears of retribution had begun to turn. The first 48 hours were a masterclass in restraint. Harold and I moved like surgeons in the dark. No calls, no emails, only encrypted burners bought with cash from a bodega in Stanford. Harold dictated. I executed. By the time the yacht Serendipity cleared Bahamian waters, the Greenwich house was already in play. I filed the original promissory note at the county clerk's office at 8:03 a.m. on the 26th. The clerk, a woman who'd processed my closing papers 20 years ago, raised an eyebrow at the date stamp 1987 but said nothing. Harold had taught me the first rule of financial warfare: never explain. The default notice hit Richard's inbox at 11:17 a.m., routed through a defunct subsidiary he'd shuttered last year. He'd open it, panic, and discover the mortgage had been called in full. $2.8 million. Due immediately. He'd call the bank. The bank would call me. I wouldn't answer. Phase 2 required daylight. I drove to the firm's headquarters in Midtown. Badge still valid, face shaved, suit pressed. The security guard wished me Merry Christmas. I smiled like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. In my office corner, 42nd floor, Hudson View, I logged into the trust portal using Harold's old credentials. The password was Richard1979. Arrogance is its own key. The trust was a corpse. $14.2 million drained in tranches, each labeled estate planning distribution. My signature had been forged with a stylus on an iPad in Richard's office. I took screenshots, exported PDFs, then initiated a clawback protocol Harold had buried in the bylaws in 1992. A single click froze every offshore account linked to the trust. The money didn't return, it simply vanished from their reach, suspended in legal limbo until a judge untangled the mess. That would take months. They had 10 days. Back in Greenwich, Harold waited in the kitchen, a legal pad covered in cramped handwriting. He'd mapped their itinerary. Nassau, tomorrow, street. Thomas the day after. Then a private island Richard had bragged about leasing. Harold's stroke had slurred his speech, not his memory. He knew the charter company, the captain's gambling debts, the fuel supplier who took bribes in untraceable crypto. We paid the captain double to strand them in street, Thomas with a catastrophic engine failure. The repair bill would be wired from an account in Richard's name. Another $180,000 gone. Night fell. I cooked for Harold's soft scrambled eggs, the only thing he could chew. He ate with his good hand, eyes on the muted television. CNN ran a segment on crypto volatility. Perfect. I shorted the exchange where Richard had parked the last of the liquid cash. A 12% drop by morning. Another $500,000 evaporated. At 2:11 a.m., Emily called from a satellite phone. I let it ring. Voicemail. Dad, something's wrong. The bank froze everything. Richard screaming. Please call me. Her voice cracked on please. I saved the message, then forwarded it to Harold's burner with a single word: leverage. Harold's plan had 3 pillars: isolate, impoverish, expose. We were 2 down. The exposure began at dawn on the 28th. I leaked the trust documents to a reporter at the Wall Street Journal anonymously through a VPN in Moldova. The headline hit at 6:04 a.m. Greenwich hire accused of embezzling family fortune. Richard's Yale yearbook photo smug and glossy. By 7:30, the firm's board was in emergency session. I was on the agenda. I didn't attend. Instead, I drove to the marina in Norwalk, where Margaret kept her sailboat, Second Wind. The slip was empty. She'd sold it 6 weeks ago, title transferred to a Delaware LLC. I traced the LLC to a P.O. box in Roadtown, Tortola. Same address as Richard's offshore account. I took photos, uploaded them to a cloud drive Harold could access from his wheelchair. Back home, Harold was asleep in the study, oxygen humming. I covered him with the blanket, then opened the safe behind the portrait. Inside, Margaret's jewelry box, untouched. She'd left the diamonds but taken the insurance policies. I laughed short, bitter. Harold stirred. They'll try to come back, he whispered, private jet, begging. Let them, I said. I drafted the email from Margaret's abandoned laptop, using her phrasing, her emojis, sent it to the charter company. Change of plans. Returning to Teterboro tomorrow. Love, M. They'd reroute the yacht to collect them. Fuel costs, $42,000, billed to the frozen account. At 11:47 p.m., Richard called from a Street Thomas payphone. I answered. Jonathan. His voice was shredded. We're stranded. No money. Emily's. She's not eating. Please. I said nothing. I can explain. He rushed. It was a mistake. A tax strategy. We were going to... Richard, I cut in calm. You left your father to die in a house you stole from me. Merry Christmas. I hung up. Harold was awake, watching. Good, he rasped. Now we wait. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world was white and merciless. Inside, the fire crackled. I poured 2 fingers of Macallan for me, not him. Harold didn't drink anymore. He just smiled. A thin, terrible thing. Tomorrow, they'd land. Broke. Hunted. Begging. But Harold had one more card. He slid a photograph across the table. Emily at 16, arm around a boy I didn't recognize. On the back, in Harold's spidery script, ask her about the abortion. Richard paid. I have the clinic records. I stared at the photo until the edges blurred. The girl in the picture was a stranger. So was the man holding it. The siege was almost over. The real war was about to begin. They landed at Teterboro at 4:12 p.m. on the 29th, gray-faced, salt-stained, eyes darting like cornered animals. A black Suburban idled at the curb, my doing. The driver wore a navy peacoat and an expression that said, no tips, no conversation. I watched from the terminal's coffee kiosk, hood up, paper cup cooling in my hand. Emily spotted the car first. She ran, heels skittering on ice, Richard lumbering behind with 2 duffels and Margaret's silence clamped between them like a third passenger. The Suburban pulled away. I followed in the old Audi Harold had insisted I drive untraceable plates, cash purchase from a widow in Darien. We took the Merritt Parkway south, then the Hutch, then local roads that twisted like intestines. The Suburban never checked its mirror. They were too busy arguing. I could almost hear it. How did this happen? Who froze the accounts? Dad will fix it. Dad always fixes it. They arrived at the house at dusk. The for sale by owner sign was already hammered into the frozen lawn, red letters bleeding against the snow. A locksmith's van sat in the driveway, engine running. Harold had scheduled the rekeying for 5 p.m. sharp. I parked 2 blocks down, killed the lights, and walked. The front door opened before they reached it. Harold wheeled out onto the porch, blanket gone, oxygen tank hissing. He wore a charcoal suit I'd never seen, tie knotted with military precision. The stroke had stolen his legs, not his menace. Richard stopped dead. Dad? Harold's voice carried, thin but lethal. Welcome home, son. Emily tried to push past. Harold raised one trembling hand. The locksmith, a kid with a neck tattoo, blocked the threshold. New owners take possession tomorrow, he said, reading from a script I'd written. You have 10 minutes to retrieve personal effects. After that, trespassing. Margaret found her voice. Jonathan? Jonathan, this is insane. I stepped from the shadows of the portico. The porch light caught the hollows under my eyes. Hello, Margaret. She flinched as if slapped. Emily started to cry ugly. Snotty sobs that tore something loose in my chest. I crushed it down. Richard dropped the duffels. We need to talk. Inside. No, Harold said. Here. On the steps like the beggars you are. The neighbor's curtains twitched. Good. Let them watch. Harold produced a manila envelope I'd prepared. Inside. The clinic receipt from 2011. Emily's signature shaky beneath procedure. D and AMP. C. A second sheet bank transfer. $12,000 from Richard's personal account to a clinic in White Plains. A third. The trust clawback order, stamped by the Cayman Monetary Authority. Richard's face went the color of spoiled milk. Emily whispered, Grandpa, please. Harold ignored her. You left me to rot? You left your father to rot? Now you will learn what rot feels like. I spoke for the first time. The house closes at 9 a.m. The yacht is impounded in street. Thomas unpaid fuel. Your credit cards are maxed. The firm suspended Richard pending investigation. The Journal wants a comment by noon. Margaret's knees buckled. Richard caught her, but his own legs shook. Emily sank to the porch boards, arms wrapped around herself. I crouched so we were eye level. You have one option. Confess. Everything. On camera. Then maybe we talk about what's left. Richard's mouth worked soundlessly. Finally. What do you want? Harold answered. Your dignity. Your future. Your name in the mud where it belongs. Emily looked up, mascara streaking. Daddy, I'm sorry. It was Richard's idea. I didn't know. Stop, I said. The word cracked like a whip. You knew enough. Harold wheeled closer. The oxygen tank hissed in rhythm with his words. Inside. 5 minutes. Take what fits in one bag each. Then you leave. Forever. Richard made a sound, half sob, half growl, and lunged for the door. The locksmith sidestepped. Richard sprawled across the threshold. Harold didn't blink. I helped Emily to her feet. Her coat was thin Bahamas. Thin. She smelled of coconut sunscreen and fear. Dad, she whispered. I'm pregnant. The world tilted. Harold's eye found mine. He gave the smallest shake of his head. Later. Inside, they moved like ghosts. I stood in the foyer, arms crossed, counting seconds. Margaret took the wedding album. Richard grabbed his laptop dead, battery long gone. Emily hesitated by the staircase, then reached for the framed photo of her at 6, gap-toothed, on my shoulders at Fenway. I let her have it. At 5:12, the locksmith locked the door behind them. The Suburban was gone. They stood on the sidewalk in the sodium streetlight, 3 silhouettes shrinking against the snow. Harold wheeled to my side. Phase 3, he murmured. I nodded. The real confession was scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow in the boardroom. Cameras rolling, a notary waiting. Harold had arranged it months ago, back when Richard still changed his diaper and thought the old man was vegetable. A final betrayal, gift-wrapped. But Emily's words clung like burrs. I'm pregnant. I felt the first fracture in the ice I'd built around my heart, Harold noticed. Blood remembers, he said, but so does justice. I didn't answer. I was watching Emily hug her coat tighter, watching Richard hail a cab that wouldn't stop, watching Margaret stare at the house as if it might still open its arms. The cab finally came. They climbed in, defeated. As it pulled away, Emily turned in the window. Our eyes met. She raised one hand, not a wave, not a plea. A question. I didn't respond. Harold and I went inside. The locksmith handed me the new keys. The house smelled of pine and betrayal. Harold poured 2 fingers of Macallan, his first in years. His hand shook, but he drank. Tomorrow, he said, they break. I stared at the dark window. Somewhere out there, my daughter carried my grandchild into a future I just burned to the ground. Harold's voice softened, almost human. Redemption's a long road, Jonathan. Starts with truth. I raised my glass. To truth. We drank. The fire popped. Outside, the snow began again, covering their footprints, erasing the last trace of the family that had been, but not the one that might still be. The boardroom smelled of lemon polish and panic. 7:58 a.m. on the 30th. Harold sat at the head of the mahogany table like a deposed king reclaiming his throne. The oxygen tank was gone. He'd weaned himself overnight with sheer spite. His suit hung loose, but his eyes were flint. I stood behind him, hands clasped, the new CEO and everything but title. Richard, Emily, and Margaret entered at 8:02, escorted by security. They looked like refugees from a shipwreck. Clothes slept in, eyes red, rimmed, the stink of desperation clinging to their skin. A court reporter adjusted her stenograph. 2 iPhones on tripods recorded from opposite corners. Harold's notary, a hawk-faced woman named Dolores, sat ready with a seal and a stare that could freeze mercury. Richard tried bravado. This is kidnapping. Harold's laugh was a dry cough. It's a settlement conference. Sit. They sat. Dolores read the terms aloud. Full restitution of $14.2 million within 48 hours, sourced from Richard's personal assets, the Hamptons condo, the Tesla, the Roth IRA he thought I didn't know about. Public admission of fraud to the board, the SEC, and the Journal. Richard would resign. Emily would sign a statement absolving me of any complicity. Margaret would file for divorce and waive alimony. In exchange, no criminal charges. Yet, Richard's jaw worked. We don't have $14 million liquid. Harold slid a folder across the table. Inside, a quitclaim deed for the Greenwich house, already transferred to a trust in Emily's unborn child's name. A second document, a $5 million life insurance policy on Richard, beneficiary, the same trust. Harold's handwriting in the margin. You die, the kid lives well. Emily's hand went to her stomach, instinctive. She hadn't told Richard. His eyes flicked to her, then to me, calculating. Margaret spoke first, voice brittle. I'll sign. I'm done. Richard lunged across the table. You bitch! Security pinned him. Harold didn't flinch. Emily's voice was small. I'll confess. Everything. Just let me keep the baby out of it. Harold studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. The confession took 43 minutes. Richard's voice cracked on the Cayman's transfers. Emily cried through the abortion story. 16. Scared. Richard driving her to the clinic while I was in Tokyo closing a deal. Margaret admitted forging my signature on the power of attorney, tears cutting channels through her makeup. Dolores's fingers flew. The cameras rolled. At 8:47, Richard signed. His hand shook so badly the pen skipped. Emily went last. She looked at me as she pressed ink to paper. I hated you for working too much, she whispered. Richard said we deserved it. I believed him. I didn't answer. Not yet. When it was over, security escorted them out. The board filed in 7 gray faces who'd golfed with me for 20 years. Harold addressed them without notes. Jonathan resumes control effective immediately. Richard is terminated for cause. The trust is restored. Any objections? Silence. Harold wheeled to the window. Snow had turned to sleet, hissing against the glass. Meeting adjourned. That night, I drove Emily to a motel off I-95. She carried one duffel and the Fenway photo. Margaret had taken a room in the city, already meeting with a divorce attorney. Richard was in a holding cell downtown SEC pickup. Anonymous tip. In the motel parking lot, Emily hesitated. The baby's a boy, she said. I found out yesterday. On the yacht, before everything. I nodded. The sleet thickened. I don't expect forgiveness, she continued. But I want him to know you, if you'll let him. I looked at her, really looked. The girl who used to fall asleep on my chest during Red Sox games. The woman who'd sold me for a cruise. Redemption's a long road, I said, echoing Harold. Starts with truth. You told it today. That's step 1. She started to cry again, quieter this time. I handed her a key card for room, $212 and $2,000 in 20s. Rent's paid for a month. There's a clinic in Stanford. Good, OB. Call them. She took the money, eyes wide. What about you? I have a house to sell and a company to rebuild, and an old man who needs breakfast. She laughed once, surprised by the sound. Back in Greenwich, Harold was asleep in the study, TV flickering with the muted journal recap. Family fraud unravels in Greenwich. I poured 2 fingers of Macallan, set 1 glass by his chair. He stirred. All done? He rasped. Almost. I showed him the ultrasound photo Emily had slipped me grainy, but the heartbeat was a comet tail. This one's ours now. Harold studied it, then me. You going soft? No, I said. Just choosing a different war. He grunted approval. Good. Hate's a young man's fuel. Family's the long burn. I raised my glass to the long burn. Outside, the sleet turned back to snow, soft and deliberate, covering the for sale sign, the tire tracks, the blood we'd spilled in the abstract. Inside, the fire settled into embers. Harold slept. I sat in the dark, listening to the house breathe. 10 days ago, I'd come home to an empty house and a whisper of revenge. Tonight, the house was full again of ghosts, yes, but also of something stubborn and green pushing through concrete. Redemption wasn't a destination. It was the next right step, taken in the dark, with no promise of dawn. But the snow kept falling, and somewhere under it, a boy's heart beat steady and strong. I drank the Macallan. It tasted like tomorrow.